So if we can go to the, okay.
Right.
So this is a very generic slide that for the most part, a lot of our heat maps will follow this because you want to be able to have, an approach that your decision maker can look at uh, where everything is predictably placed. Uh, you're having a common way of looking at it. Now, you'll vary the proxies and vary the customers and that sort of thing. But as far as where the low risk is, the high risk, they tend to be in the same place. So if someone's looking at it, they've got a framework that they're used to. It also makes it easier to compare frameworks and to pile the frameworks on top of each other. So in this one, we have two axes, the x axis and the y axis,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and each one of those represent a risk proxy, and that's part of the design process is to figure out which risk proxies you're going to use and how you're going to quantify them. You could use a per transaction amount. You could use an aggregate transaction amount. You could use a KYC risk ranking, whatever you're using. But you have to do it and you have to be able to scale it numerically. And then what you do is you want your least risky customers on the way that you're designing these access to be in the lower left-hand quadrant, where I have explained the benign. And hopefully, if you do it right, you'll have most of your customers, in sort of dots in that quadrant. And, if you do it right, you don't have to spend much time on it. You may do a little bit of sampling to understand them, but, you're not going to spend much time on that. In the upper right-hand quadrant, that's where you have, if you've done your access right, that's where you should have, your more potentially riskier customers. You're going to obviously spend a lot more time on them. But at least on the first time that you do this with a respondent bank or group of banks, you're going to have a bunch in the middle where you might have to do like a one-time review of those, where you're looking at the counterparties and looking at the public source information like their infrastructure or whatever. But since this is a repeatable process that you're going to do on a regular basis, you simply store that work product in a reusable manner. And whenever you rerun the data, you're running it against a reference file that contains your institutional memory on those counterparties, and you're populating with that. Now, there may be some changes, and every so often you should validate, or make sure that you're not going off flawed data. But, there's a big difference between the first time you do it, where you're spending a fair amount of time designing it and creating your reference files. But once you've done that step and you're comfortable with what you have, then every incremental time that you run it, you've got a foundation and you hopefully can do it very, very quickly, oftentimes in less than an hour. You just have a new download of data and you're putting your framework over it and say, yeah, nothing's changed, or this stuff has changed, but I'm comfortable with it, or this stuff has changed and I need to talk to my respondent about it, whatever the result is. And, once you come up with a heat map approach that works, you tend to just add that to your toolbox and you keep adding different tools. And then, it's like anything else where you have a toolbox. You don't use all the tools on every single project. You're picking and choosing the tools that are most useful, for the particular respondent you have. So I may be using heat maps, that are more tailored to drug cartels in Latin America. If I'm in the Middle East, maybe particularly in the Gulf, maybe I'm looking more at sanctions evasion heat maps and that sort of thing.
Right. And I think that on this particular technique, heat mapping, um, in your views or in your experience, like how commonly this is used among banks in the emerging countries. I know that maybe in more developed countries, this is commonly used technique, but have you seen like in the respondent, banks, this is a common technique that they use in different countries?
Yeah, I guess partly I'm not sure about that. It's certainly something that we've shared. It's certainly something I've shared either through volunteer work or when I was with the banks. Um, and in some cases we'd actually share this with them. Uh, when I would be doing volunteer work with central banks, I remember we did something, it was Michael Cho and myself, you know Michael very well.
Right.
We're working with the Central Bank of Iraq, and we were working with their FIU, and we spent an awful lot of time with them, and they were very interested in it to the point where they were having me give them tutorials on how to do pivot tables in Excel and that sort of thing. Um, and they had the benefit because all the cross-border wires actually went through the central bank. So they had access to 100% of the wires going in and out of the country. So, I'd say it's very much a learnable technique, and you can learn it and be quite effective, at the spreadsheet level, and only, as you mature, would you move it maybe into a different system. But as far as actually who does use it, I guess maybe I'm not connected enough to what's currently happening now to be able
Right.
to answer that
But
question.
I think that's a very helpful piece of information for the audience that, if they're interested, they can definitely learn more about it in a more detailed sort of way, because I think this is like a revolutionary tool to understand risk.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've had more than a few discussions with central banks around the world about this technique, as well as respondent banks themselves. Um, so,
Sure.